Researchers have warned that an extra 56,000 children are obese as a result of being kept at home during the pandemic. Now, levels rose sharply amongst 10 and 11-year-olds, over 16,000 of who became severely obese, according to a new study. Now, they could cost the NHS and other health providers $800 million and almost $9 billion more widely over their lives, as up to 85% of obese kids remain obese into adulthood. Now, obesity in 4 to 5-year-olds also increased by 45% in the pandemic. This, though, returned to pre-pandemic levels once schools reopened, although it still represents 121,000 children. Experts partly blame the rise on a lack of exercise and poor diet when the kids were kept at home with their parents. Sleeping schedules and excessive screen time also played a part, all issues that parents are still grappling with. Esther, what do you think? Are parents to blame for childhood obesity?
No, of course. I mean, there's no one else to blame. I think as a parent, I would feel embarrassed if I tried to find anyone else to blame other than myself for my child being obese. I do appreciate that the pandemic did exacerbate it because obviously it was harder to move around and all of that. But at the end of the day, children are sponges and they absorb their parents' habits. You know, if your parents are obese, you're 4 times more likely to be obese yourself. And I think we actually should be addressing the lifestyle of parents as opposed to just saying, oh, children are obese and therefore it is your fault. I mean, it is your fault. But I think, you know, unhealthy adults raise unhealthy children, and so we should be addressing health in lifestyle health as a nation more broadly than just saying it's about the children,
well,
it's about the parents.
Who else we could blame? And I mean, the government. We live in an obese neogenic society. Our supermarkets are filled with ultra-processed foods. You know, what else is a parent supposed to buy?
Use some personal responsibility and not buy their children junk food. I mean, the thing is, I don't buy this argument that because we're surrounded by junk food, therefore we have to become an obese society. No one is forcing you to eat unhealthy food and to lead an unhealthy lifestyle. At the end of the day, you have autonomy over your body. You choose what you eat. You're not force-fed anything, and you choose how you live your life. And I think at the end of the day, if parents have bad habits, they can't blame anyone but themselves that their children absorb that as well.
I mean, I haven't heard of many cases where children have got fat on apples, Gemma. So maybe it is a choice that parents have to make on what they're feeding children, and they are then ultimately responsible.
I'm not a fan of like blame culture. I think most parents are doing their best, and most parents will be not wanting their children to become obese, of course. But we live in an obesogenic environment. That's the absolute key word. Everything around us in society now promotes certain behaviours which contribute towards obesity. And unfortunately, there are more takeaways of fast food joints on high streets than there've ever been before. And if you take a 15-year-old that's out with his kids, out with his mates at lunchtime and go, we're all going to go and buy an apple. Like, they don't. They go and buy a packet of chips for £1. Plus, people are really struggling at the moment. And if you've got stressed out, skint parents, if you look at calorie-dense food, it's really cheap and it's going to fill their kids up and they're going to be happy and full. And that might, again, be quite beige
blame
food.
Culture? I don't understand.
Well, I'm just saying it's a bit simplistic to say, like, parents.
No, but what is the definition of blame culture?
Fault.
I don't understand what that means.
But can I just finish answering this question which we're talking about? So basically, that kind of food is very, very cheap. Like a punnet of blueberries is like £3.50. So if you've only got a couple of quid, you're not going to give them the punnet of blueberries, which isn't going to fill them up, even though it's very nutrient high. And the other thing is, if you're totally stressed out and you haven't got much time, you're unlikely to sort of make a lentil bake in the evening, and then your kid's going to go, I don't want to eat that. So there's so many different factors. And then Michael Gove systematically dismantled a network of school sports partnerships, which were set up back in the day. So the amount of PE has gone down as well, which is problematic.
The amount of PE went down during lockdown for everyone.
For everybody. And my son, actually, who's rake thin, and he's gone back to being rake thin, he did pile on some pounds during lockdown, and that was despite me and his dad in our different homes making every effort. We were doing flipping Joe Wicks. I was going every day, and I was going, come on, we've got to go for walks. And it was weird. That didn't balance out walking to school every day and getting the bus and running around in the playground.
Well, this is focusing in on children, but actually I do think a lot of my friends, me included, put on a lot of weight in lockdown, so this affected adults as well. But I suppose the interesting thing is that it went back to pre-pandemic levels for the 5 to 6-year-olds, but for older kids it tended to remain, and I wonder whether it's because those other habits persisted, and maybe that's a parental problem.
Well, I mean,
I'm going to go to the calls just very quickly and speak to Pat from London. Pat, what's your thoughts? Are parents solely to blame for fat children?
Good morning, Storm. Always a great show. Always love watching your show.
Yeah. We always like getting a call from you.
My angle on it is, what's happened in the world is I've 17 nieces and nephews and in Dublin, Ireland. And the thing is that many children are now dictating to their parents what they eat. And power has been given to the children.
Yeah,
And
so you're talking about
children are
pester
bullying.
power there. Now, pester
They're
power is...
bullying their parents, and they're deciding. Many parents like what other parents are doing right, but many children are dictating to and telling their parents what they want. They want
I hear
pizzas.
what you're
They
saying
want
there. Can I just interject? You're talking about pester power. I don't think we can talk about children bullying parents because there's either serious psychological issues going on there or the parents just need to stand up to their children a little bit more and learn to say no. But the pester power, I think, is a real issue, and part of that comes down to advertising. So maybe the government needs to crack down on advertising on education.
I understand what you're saying, but I have seen and I see children telling their parents. I have nieces and nephews, and they tell my brothers and sisters what they should and shouldn't do, and they give in to them. And the reason why, because their parents are very, very busy business people, and they feel guilty they're not giving them time. So they say, oh, we let them do whatever they want, eat whatever they want.
Yeah, but then this is going into perhaps a societal issue, isn't it? Why are the parents so busy? Well, maybe because both parents have to work in order to pay astronomical rent and mortgages. Jemma, you wanted to interject?
Just to say, the point of like hidden sugars as well, and the labelling on food is so confusing. And the way that the supermarkets are set up, all the stuff that assails your senses that is easy to grab, a lot of it isn't particularly healthy. So, you know, it's like whether the state gets involved with that.
I don't, like, we're not mindless sheep. Just because something is there doesn't mean you have to eat it. Just because your child says, I want this, doesn't mean you have to.
Kids are mindless sheep when they're out with their mates.
But here's the thing. I don't know if the culture's changed, maybe, you know, parenting has changed, but if I asked my mother for food that was unhealthy for me, she would say no, and that's the end of the conversation. I don't understand why we're acting like we have no autonomy or we have no authority. Your child, first of all, again, I think there's a cultural issue here. Your child shouldn't be able to dictate anything to you.
No, but a lot of kids aren't with you all the time. So, like, I know that my son spends quite a lot of time hanging out in McDonald's with his mates. When he comes home, I provide, like, healthy food. And I'm like, what have you eaten today?
Well, that's bigger than that, because you have to ask, what is your child doing all day? I mean, I don't understand a fat 10-year-old. Like, your job is to run around and be a kid.
Okay, but the problem is kids are running around less, they're outside less. So again, a societal issue. But again, Pat, thank you very much for bringing that up. And Esther would agree with you that actually parents just have to learn to say no to their children. I do want to bring in Nicola Ludlam-Rain, a dietitian and author of Mummy Nutrition Guide. Would you say, Nicola, that parents are solely to blame for childhood obesity?
Childhood obesity is something that we need to take seriously, because what we know is that it leads to adulthood obesity. And I do agree with a lot of what's been said, but it's not assigning blame to a single entity, because childhood obesity is multifaceted. So it involves genetics, environment, socioeconomic status, and lifestyles too, as well as sleep habits. So parents, schools, communities, governments all play a role in shaping our child's relationship with food and physical activity too.
What is the biggest mistakes that parents are making then when it comes to their kids' diets?
When you look at the research, it shows that children are only getting on average 2 portions of fruit and vegetables a day, which is less than half of what guidelines recommend. And there was also an NHS campaign a few years ago, which was around smaller tummies and smaller plates, which is to do with making sure that our children are given appropriate sized meals. And perhaps most importantly, not making our children clear the plates, which overrides their internal hunger and fullness cues. So there's something called the division of responsibility, and that's where the parent decides what, where and when, and then the child decides how much. But manufacturers also have a responsibility, exactly what you were saying about banning cartoons and character advertising on those foods that are high in fat and high in sugar.
Now, the other issue that will come into this, I'm sure someone will bring it up, is mental health. If you're going to put a child on a diet, let's say you've got an overweight child, what is a parent supposed to do? Because if you put them on a diet, that could be damaging for their mental health, couldn't it?
100%. In the sense that diets can be restrictive and banning foods, 100% no, because that can damage a child physically as well as psychologically. So we don't want children to lose weight. What we want is for certain children to slow down that rate of weight gain so that they grow into their weight. Where to start? The best place is to start with what they should be having more of: role modelling, fruits, vegetables. The NHS have got a fantastic website called Healthier Families. And also there's a fantastic charity called Henry, who are doing amazing work nationwide in reducing levels of childhood obesity.
It's a really interesting concept that actually you're not looking for kids to lose weight, they're going to grow into their weight. Fascinating. Nicola, stay with us. I'm going to take some calls on this. Hilary from Warwickshire, what's your thoughts? Are parents solely to blame for this?
No, I don't, because when my grandson was 8, he was declared at school to be obese.
Okay.
And my daughter was a children's nurse, and she took him to the hospital, and they said, no, it's muscles. And now he's 17 and a half. He's 6'2", weighs 16 stone, but is a fantastic rugby player.
Hilary, I hear this all the time when we talk about BMIs and how it doesn't, it's maybe a guide, but it doesn't work for everyone. Would you agree with that, Nicola?
Yeah, the BMI, body mass index, it's fantastic for the general population, but what we know is that it doesn't work on an individual level. And as this call has quite rightly said, the BMI doesn't differentiate between fat and muscle. So that's why we need to go on things like waist circumference as well, and also trends and activity levels, which may matter more than where your child is on the BMI chart.
I also wonder whether children go through growth spurts, and just before they're about to take a growth spurt, I mean, I only have an 18-month-old, so I've only experienced it from a baby's perspective, but they do get a little chunky, they start to get little wrinkles around the wrist, and then all of a sudden that goes and they look really slimline and slim. So I wonder whether some of it might actually be a natural process of growing up, although there has been an increase. Hilary, thanks for bringing that to our attention. Barbara from Newcastle, what's your view on this? Parents solely to blame? Do we need to look at what the government's doing? Do we need to look at supermarkets?
Good morning, Stormpet. I love the show.
Oh, good. I'm delighted to hear it,
Right,
Barbara. What's your thoughts?
I think it's a little bit unfair how you can blame the parents, but it's a catch-22, because when my kids were younger, we always used to say, eat your dinner and you'll grow big and strong.
Mm-hmm.
And if you didn't eat your dinner, it was your tea, and that was the end of it. But now the problem with this day and age is you give the kids money to go out with their friends, and then they've got all of these chicken shops and burger shops and all the other things. You can't force them to eat healthy. And then the other thing is there's computers now. When my kids were younger, they'd go out and play football or boxing.
Yeah, I think, Barbara, what you've done there is touch on a lot of elements that are probably contributing to our obesity problem in general, I'd say, not just for children, but certainly for children too. Barbara, thank you very much for your call. We've got loads of calls coming in, so I'll try and fire through as many as possible. Jean from Cornwall, you're up next. Is it the parents' fault? Is everything the parents' fault?
I don't think that the parents are entirely to blame, because life is life, isn't it? We are surrounded by supermarket foods and all the rest of it. But I do think parents are mainly to blame, and especially mums, because mums are the ones who generally provide the food for the children.
OK, that's changing, but I hear what you're saying there. But what are parents supposed to do when, they get kids going out to schools, there's chicken shops around the corner for lunchtime, all their friends are on computer games, they're not out to play. We live in a society where combating obesity and combating weight gain is incredibly difficult. In which case is it not the government's job to step in and change that?
We're always saying, let the government do it. Let the parents do it. Tell your children, get off the iPad, get off whatever you're playing on, and go and play. But as far as food is concerned, why is it that people are still blaming the pandemic? It was 3 years ago. 3 years, and why are these children still obese?
Well, yes, because I
she's
suppose
right.
The habits that were formed during the pandemic for young children are still persisting, and parents are still grappling with those changes. But I hear what you're saying. We can only blame the pandemic for a certain amount of time. Nicola, I just wanted to check in with you very quickly. When it comes to losing weight, I always heard it was 80% what you eat and 20% exercise, but we're hearing exercise all the time. And I suppose in children that ratio might be slightly different, is it?
Yeah, so in adults, that is what I would say. But I think with children, preschoolers, so ages 1 to 4, actually need around 3 hours of physical activity a day. So basically moving around. And then from 5 and upwards, they need at least an hour. So we want to be encouraging parents, if they can, walk to school instead of driving. Can they go out on a weekend and basically like role model? So bring physical activity into the day-to-day lives and reducing screen time, of course. But what I'm not sure or has been said is that the levels of childhood obesity are actually almost twice as high in the socially deprived areas.
Yeah.
So that's where the government needs to be targeting their effort and support. And just to remember, it's empathy before education.
And why is that, do you think, as a nutritionist, that it's in the more deprived areas?
A few different reasons. So education, cost of living, cooking skills. So that these parents need to be educated, but we also need to not judge, because when it comes to weight and also parenting styles, they're two topics that people can get very sensitive about. So the way that we approach this, way that healthcare professionals approach it, has to be done in a very sensitive manner. And even just looking at the types of shops that are in these areas, that's where the changes need to be made. And shops such as, Aldi and Lidl, I think, are doing great things because they're offering fruits and vegetables at low cost. So things are starting to happen.
And that's why it is important not to judge, because it is absolutely, the obesity in those deprived areas is much, much higher. Like, I could pay for swimming lessons, I could pay for footy lessons on a Saturday. It was great, it occupied my kids, they were doing healthy stuff, but it all costs money. And there's very, very little in the way of those kinds of resources at community, grassroots levels.
I mean, Lisa from Suffolk, sorry, I just want to fire in and get more calls. Lisa from Suffolk, what's your thoughts on this? Is it parents?
I think it's all of us. This is an environmental issue as well. If the kids are obese, if people are obese, they're consuming double the amount of what a body should consume. So not if we only got like nearly 8 billion people on this planet, let's say half of us are consuming double the amount what we should. It's an environmental issue as well.
So we've just become, in the West, we've just become consumers, and it's hard, I suppose, to break out of that. Have you changed your mind at all, having listened to all the arguments?
No, actually, this has only made me double down. But I will say that one of the things that we talk about with time poverty, because that's something that they attribute to rising obesity rates, the King has been trying to experiment with this idea of soup kitchens in local communities, because people don't actually have the time to cook nutritious food. So they're trying to get restaurants and food establishments that have sort of excess food or produce to pull together and actually try and cook for local communities. And I think that's a better plan. But at the end of the day, I don't understand the word blame culture. The reality is, if you have an obese child, it is because of 99% because of the parents and the lifestyles that they lead. And we should spell it out clearly, but we should also try and support them to change the culture, as opposed to saying it's not your fault or don't have your feelings hurt.
What I meant by that is it's very judgmental just to say parents are to blame 100%. That's
the truth.
No, it isn't, as we've heard from so many people.
Who's feeding your
many
child?
factors.
I mean,
it's a part of it, but it's not. Society has changed completely, as has people's body shapes.
Wrap this debate up, but I think leaving us with what Nicola had said about sort of being empathetic about people's situation is probably the best way to handle it. Lisa, thank you very much for your call. Thanks for all your calls on this. A huge thank you to Nicola for joining us for that debate. After the break.